Despite having written and directed some of the most iconic films of all time, and also having his name on a lot of gems as a producer, Sam Raimi is still oddly absent from the conversation of all-timers in the film industry. It begs the question, what exactly are people's criteria when they are choosing these names? Is it solely based on the quality of the filmmaker's work, or are other factors taken into consideration, such as reputation, consistency, and support for other filmmakers? Because if so, I think the case of whether or not Sam Raimi's name belongs in these conversations is pretty open and shut. The original Evil Dead trilogy, Spider-Man 1 and 2, Drag Me to Hell, I mean, these are some of the most entertaining movies ever made, but we're not allowed to talk about them in this fashion because a perfect drama is held in much higher regard than a perfect horror film. I'd go as far as to say this. A Ghost Story, for example, is my favorite film of all time. But if you were to put a copy of A Ghost Story and Drag Me to Hell in front of me and ask me which one I would rather rewatch over and over and over again, obviously I'm gonna choose Drag Me to Hell. That is a no fucking brainer. Now, I'm not saying that a film's rewatchability is necessarily a testament to its quality. I mean, I love all the Scream movies. I rewatch them all the time, and those aren't exactly high art. But I do think there is something to be said for films that exist purely to entertain and thrill, with some likable characters to guide you through it. Why is it that these films are considered lower quality? After all, movies are entertainment as well as art, and god damn it if Sam Raimi hasn't perfected the blend of both. Send Help marks Sam Raimi's return to the director's chair after Multiverse of Madness in 2022, and holy shit is it a more than welcome one. I'm sorry, look, we are going to have a more constructive, articulate discussion about this movie in a minute, but just let me have this, okay? This movie was fucking awesome, and it is some of the most fun I've had at the movies in a very, very long time. I saw it with my best friend, and we were having the time of our lives at every twist and turn, out-of-pocket line, absurdly morbid joke, and of course, the signature Sam Raimi random bursts of extreme violence. This is truly one of the most entertaining and consistently riveting films I have seen in a very, very long time, and I cannot wait to get that Blu-ray when it comes out and add it to my ever-growing Blu-ray collection so that I can share it with all of my other friends and family, because it truly is the perfect movie to watch with a group of friends. It's very reactionary. Okay, now that that's over, what the hell is this movie about? Rachel McAdams plays Linda, an employee at this company that recently came under new leadership in the form of Bradley, played by Dylan O'Brien. Linda is a very awkward type who is pushed aside and made the punching bag of her coworkers, whereas Bradley is a douchebag nepo baby CEO who couldn't give less of a shit about his employees. And one night during a flight for a company trip, the plane crashes in the middle of the ocean. Linda and Bradley, being the only two survivors, become stranded together on a deserted island, and suddenly their dynamic as employer and employee is put to the test. I feel like no plot synopsis could ever truly do this film justice, because what I just described to you sounds like a movie we've seen 1,000 times. Plane crashes, stranded on an island, we gotta survive. We've all seen that before, but this movie has two secret weapons that help elevate the narrative into something that feels uniquely its own. Sam Raimi behind the camera, and the dynamic of these two lead characters being the core narrative focus and through line throughout the entirety of the film. Raimi's direction here is as tight and energetic as ever, making this film so much more entertaining and visually striking than it would be if some random director for hire was assigned to this project. And also, the two lead performances of the film are impeccable. Obviously, Rachel McAdams has been well established as a fan favorite actress for some time now, but I legitimately think this might be her best work. And Dylan O'Brien, oh my god, look, I have been rooting for that guy since Teen Wolf, alright? He was the best part of that show, and he led the Maze Runner trilogy, which I personally feel is insanely fucking underrated, but I digress. And honestly, he's only continued to prove himself as a true force of fucking nature to be reckoned with in the acting world, and yet still has not been given his flowers, in my opinion. And similar with McAdams, I genuinely think this might be O'Brien's best work. And as I said, one of this film's secret weapons is the dynamic between these two characters and how it develops and conflicts throughout the film. So you hire two of the most talented actors currently working in the industry to bring that to life. It's pretty undeniable that you've kind of struck gold with that. And we're gonna talk more about that aspect of the movie in a moment, but I want to get the rest of my overall opinions and basic thoughts out of the way first. Visually, the film is stunning, and I'm not just talking about Raimi's genius eye for memorable visuals, I'm also talking about specifically the color grading in this film. The setting is inherently beautiful, and there are many scenes where the color grading allows us to bask in and soak in that beauty in moments where the characters are as well. But when the film delves into darker, more serious thriller type territory, the color grading accommodates this without falling into the sort of elementary trap of color grading, which is, oh, okay, this is a very dark and serious scene, so I'm just gonna turn that saturation all the way the fuck down. No, this film never does that. The film remains vibrant throughout, but what these color graders chose to enhance and pull back on in these moments is what truly made these sequences visually accommodating for the subject matters at hand, while still allowing the film to never lose its saturated beauty. Danny Elfman's score is also wonderful. It's honestly kind of subversive too, because it's really not the kind of score that I would expect to hear in a movie like this, but in execution, it was just so obviously the right choice. I honestly think that hiring another composer for this film and having their work in this soundtrack would have legitimately lowered the quality of the movie. I really love what Danny Elfman was doing here. And finally, the writing here is so damn clever. I'm gonna wait to talk about spoilers until much later in the video, just in case anybody watching this video who hasn't seen the film still gets something out of it. So for right now, all I will say is that it is genuinely shocking to me that these are the same writers that wrote Freddy vs. Jason, the Friday the 13th remake from 2009, and Baywatch. 3 undeniably terrible movies, and then they just randomly slammed this script down on the table? What the fuck happened? Sure, Raimi's direction has a lot to do with how entertaining and well-paced the film is, but it honestly also has just as much to do with how well-structured the script is. These writers show a deep understanding of cause and effect, character growth and regression, as well as ensuring that by the end of the movie, everything still makes sense, even after all the twists and turns and everything. You don't kind of stare at me while I do this, dude. I'm not gonna be able to fucking do it if you do that. Stop. Alright. Bro. Not to mention, the film is first and foremost a dark comedy, which is one of the most widely discussed aspects of it, and comedy is arguably the hardest thing to write out of all of those things, and yet every single joke landed. And once again, no spoilers yet, but the way everything progressed and wrapped up, loved it. Absolutely loved it. I would also like to throw some praise at the violence in this film, as that is a Raimi-ism, and what I will say is that the violence here is nowhere near as frequent as it is in other thrillers and horror films directed by Raimi, but when this film is violent, Jesus fucking Christ, it is very violent. The boar scene, if you've seen it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Good God. And of course, a certain physical altercation that takes place in the woods later in the film also had me squirming in my seat a bit. All of this violence was practically done from what I could tell, and it looked amazing, and the amount of blood splatter and blood flow was so over the top in typical Raimi fashion, and of course with the film's consistent dark humor underlying all of it, it was impossible not to fall in love with it. Alright, now let's get into these characters and their dynamic and talk about why it specifically elevates this film above other films with a similar premise. First of all, both of them are established insanely well within the first 15 minutes of the film alone. Just after those first 15 minutes, I felt like I already knew exactly who these people were, as if I had known them for much longer than 15 minutes. Linda is very awkward with her coworkers, but she's not necessarily a recluse. She makes a genuine effort to spark conversation with the people around her, and even when this is met with pretty obvious passive aggression, Linda doesn't let that affect the way she treats people. She still remains very kind and outgoing. This instantly got me to sympathize with her character, and it's honestly a great way to get us to immediately side with her character and to stay on her side for what we can assume will be the rest of the movie. Not to mention the way that the language of filmmaking itself is used to put us in her shoes. For example, a scene early on where she sort of inserts herself into a conversation with this new douchebag CEO, and she doesn't realize that she still has a piece of the tuna sandwich she was eating stuck to the side of her face. This could have easily been executed like any other scene with basic coverage, medium close-ups, and things like that, but no. This movie, once again with those Raimi-isms and stylistic choices, has extreme close-ups of the piece of tuna on the side of her lip and an extreme close-up of the CEO's eyes noticing this piece of food, and these angles were shot with 0.5 lenses, so it just really puts you in her shoes and makes you feel that secondhand embarrassment tenfold, makes you feel like you are Linda rather than just like you're observing Linda. She has various character quirks that aren't exactly vital to getting us to care, but do a lot of heavy lifting in regards to just further endearing us to her character. For example, she has a pet parakeet that she shares her dinner with, and of course, she is a massive fan of Survivor, which is more vital to the character, obviously. She is such a super fan of that show, in fact, that she auditioned to be on it, which a lot of her coworkers make fun of her for. And Bradley is pretty much everything you would expect from a male CEO who only received that job title because of nepotism. His father recently passed, and he is his natural successor, and you can tell that he probably didn't shed a single tear when his dad died, and he certainly couldn't give less of a shit about his employees. He's pretty much everything you would expect from a corporate egomaniac, including but not limited to him attempting to coerce the women in the office into, well, you know. So before the first act of the film is even over, a very, very hard line is drawn in the sand in regards to who we like and who we don't. Not only that, but a very clear power dynamic is also established in that first act between these two characters, making them the perfect duo to center this film around. In the office, it's Bradley's world, but on the island, it's Linda's, and Bradley has a very, very hard time accepting that fact. And once these two are on the island, it is a riveting back and forth cat and mouse game in which the roles of cat and mouse are turned around and swapped and flipped on their head time and time and time again. And in that way, the film manages to be incredibly crowd-pleasing and satisfying without ever coming off as cheap. Linda as a character does feel unique, and she is unique to this film, and so it doesn't come off as forced or cheap when the story starts to reveal that she's kind of a badass. The badass female character trope is one that many male writers and directors fall into a very common trap with, which is that many of these characters aren't all that well written aside from being a badass, as if they're only allowed to be one thing rather than multifaceted like actual people. Linda is a perfect example not only of how to play into this trope, but to do it right and also subvert many expectations that are very commonly associated with it. Yeah, she's a badass. She is an expert survivalist and is more than capable of taking care of herself and Bradley and building and crafting and hunting. But she's also been an outcast her entire life, and the film does not shy away from exploring how that affects her as a person, how that affects her on the island, and the way she goes about exercising these abilities. It truly does allow us as the audience to see a much more complex depiction of her psyche than would have been done in, you know, a more basic, average thriller. It also never betrays the most likable and endearing aspects of her character, and it actually makes for a pretty compelling character study, all things considered. And of course this goes both ways, because in the same way that the film manages to toy with your expectations and emotions and feelings towards Linda as a character as the story progresses, it manages to do the same with Bradley, which is honestly arguably more impressive considering how hard that line was drawn in the first act of the film in regards to Bradley being somebody that very, very, very few audience members out there would be willing to extend even the slightest bit of sympathy or empathy to. And that's simply by nature of just who his character is. And yet, the film has a way of fooling you and almost manipulating you into caring at a certain point. This film loves to use your own psychology and emotions against you. It does it constantly, and all the better for it. This is absolutely a manipulative film, but not in a bad way. Not in the way that many other films out there are, where they just use certain hot button topics and issues and subject matters to provoke emotion out of the audience. Send Help doesn't manipulate you with cheap tactics like this, and it certainly doesn't do it by merely including a certain subject matter in the story. Rather, it puts two polar opposites against each other, draws a very hard line in the sand in regards to which one you're supposed to love and which one you're supposed to hate, and then explores how they affect each other and influence each other throughout the film, which of course leads to exploring how they could possibly connect with each other in certain ways. It's sort of like the saying, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, except in this case, the friend in question is just as capable of being your enemy, and in real life probably would be. The film also manages to toy with gender dynamics just by nature of its premise, and this is another example of how the film is able to apply commentary without insisting upon itself. This is exactly why the writing is so smart. It never insists on itself. It manages to incorporate social commentary in a way that feels incredibly natural and earned rather than forced, which, in my opinion, is kind of the best way to do social commentary in movies, doing it to a point where it almost feels incidental and therefore will not alienate any portion of your audience, which, again, in my opinion, is more likely to shift the viewpoints of certain audience members that potentially wouldn't have been as open-minded if your film was, shoving it down their throats. Because in cases like these, it feels warranted and natural and earned. It feels like these topics would logically come up and come into the conversation in a situation like this. It doesn't just feel like the writer being like, I'm gonna just throw something in here because I have to say something, right? This is a piece of art, right? I have to say something. Okay, here you go. And it's just kind of like a throwaway one-liner. For example, Bradley's character is pretty obviously an example of toxic masculinity, but he is not a caricature of toxic masculinity. The film isn't trying to sell the message, this character is toxic because he is a man. Rather, it's asking us to contemplate how his toxicity is affected and potentially worsened by his having experienced life with inherent male privilege, which is a significantly more nuanced discussion and therefore more fitting for a fictional narrative. And it's these two methods of storytelling, manipulation and natural commentary, that make this film riveting from start to finish. And of course, it only helps that the two leads that you cast in this film just so happen to be two of the most talented actors currently working in Hollywood. They play off of each other shockingly well. My theater was laughing at pretty much every interaction they had. They're genuinely just that good. The dynamic starts off pretty simple at first. Oh, okay, I see. Bradley's the boss on the mainland, but when they're on the island, Linda's the boss because Linda's a survivalist and the roles are going to be reversed, blah, 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 blah. But the film explores the themes and questions raised by its narrative in a much more nuanced and twisted and fucked up way than most other movies with similar plots would ever even dare to. And it does this by, as I already said, testing and constantly challenging your feelings and opinions towards these two lead characters constantly throughout the film. One scene in particular, involving a knife and some truly stomach-churning sound design, had me and my friend covering our faces for the entire scene, almost the entire scene, even though the act itself is never actually shown. But it wasn't just because of those technical factors. So much of it really did have to do with how well these actors are able to switch between different facets of their characters' personalities. This is precisely the reason why I found much of this film to be incredibly unpredictable, which is interesting considering one of the main criticisms floating around about this movie right now is that it is predictable. So I honestly think it's just a case-by-case basis, because I also have seen other reviewers who agree with me that the film was incredibly unpredictable, and most of them do point to this aspect of the writing to support that claim, which is that the dialogue and the way these characters are written requires these actors to constantly switch up their attitudes towards each other and their tone of voice. So make of that what you will. In my opinion, it's through this that the film is able to build tension constantly, with short little build-ups and bursts and isolated moments, but also a consistently underlying tension in the background of everything from the start of the film to the end that consistently and just continues to wind up and tighten like a guitar string about to snap until the climax, which we are brought into with a twist that I genuinely didn't see coming and couldn't have seen coming, and yet it still made perfect sense. It's honestly kind of infuriating when I see writers do this so well, because believe me, I have tried and it is so fucking hard. So yeah, it does kind of piss me off when I see somebody do it so well, because I'm just like, how the fuck did you do that? I have to kill you now. You're too much of a threat. Overall, the film left me with this sort of wickedly, like, twisted, fucked up feeling of satisfaction, which is, you know, a very specific feeling that's kind of only excusable with films like this. If the film had been more self-serious and somber with its plot and its narrative and its characters and their backstories, I would legitimately have to question the stability of my moral compass if I left it feeling this kind of satisfaction. But this movie allows us as viewers to sort of bask in that more fucked up side of ourselves that wants to see certain things happen to awful people. And honestly, I actually think it's a pretty great utility that these kinds of films provide, offering us an avenue to, you know, indulge those thoughts and feelings in a fictional world rather than acting out on them in the real world. So now that I've gotten my general opinion of the movie out of the way, and also a spoiler-free sort of discussion and analysis about the film's characters and themes, I would now that we're, you know, sort of at the back end of the video, to sort of discuss some more spoilery moments that stand out, to say the least. First up, we just have to get this one out of the way now, because it's absolutely gonna be the big scene that everyone's talking about, the castration scene. Oh my god. That is one of the meanest scenes that has ever been put to screen in any capacity. It genuinely kind of pissed me off, but in the best way imaginable. And you know why it's one of the meanest scenes ever put to screen? Because it wasn't actually fucking happening. Bradley is paralyzed for the entirety of the scene. He is naked from the waist down, and Linda's hands are holding a knife and are down there and are moving, and you hear cutting and you hear flesh tearing. At one point, blood even spatters up onto Bradley's face. Then, once Linda is done, she raises her arm to reveal her hand holding not Bradley's nutsack, but a rat that she was carving up in between his legs to, you know, sell the illusion to him that she was actually doing what she was doing. Because another thing that this paralysis that she inflicted upon him does is numb the entire body, so he wouldn't technically feel the pain. It reminded me of that one scene in the movie Hard Candy. Does anybody remember that movie? I remember that movie. Why do I kind of like that movie? Anyway, if you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. Moving on. But anyways, this scene is the most obvious example of the movie acknowledging its themes of power dynamics based solely on sex, with Linda literally threatening Bradley's manhood in a moment where he is incredibly physically vulnerable. Are you listening to anything I'm talking about, by the way? Yes. Oh my god. Are you more interested in the movie now?
No, actually, not at all.
Why?
That sounds very gross.
You don't see anything.
I know.
This, of course, comes directly after a scene where Bradley drugged Linda and attempted to escape the island without her. So this is honestly a perfect example of what I was talking about earlier with how this film toys with your feelings and emotions towards certain characters through their actions. Narratively, thematically, during the time while we do think that Linda is legitimately castrating Bradley, it is kind of satisfying to watch because of how terrible of a person Bradley is. But the thing about the scene that toys with our emotions is Rachel McAdams being so fucking good at being genuinely terrifying during the entire thing, to the point where you do almost start to feel bad for Bradley. So those two conflicting emotions never really reach a middle ground in your mind, and you're sort of just left teetering on the edge of your moral compass, wondering whether or not, you know, you're more like Linda or more like Bradley. Granted, once it's revealed that she wasn't actually castrating him and she was just doing it to scare the shit out of him and send a message that he shouldn't fuck with her, it's a lot easier to cheer that on. And of course, we have to talk about the most violent scene in the film, this of course being a scene where Linda goes to hunt a boar and succeeds in killing one. I know some people were disappointed that this level of violence wasn't saved for a scene that was more vital to the narrative and the plot, but I would argue that this scene is actually incredibly vital to Linda as a character, and considering the plot is solely focused on the development of these characters, I would say this scene therefore is vital to the plot as a whole. It's a scene that is a perfect visual representation of the fact that Linda is somebody who is more than willing to get her hands dirty and perhaps even hopes that she will, because she isn't permanently traumatized or damaged emotionally in any way by this encounter. If anything, it seems to give her a massive boost of adrenaline and confidence when she actually gets back and drops the decapitated boar's head right in front of Bradley, which says a lot about who this character actually is and works as very good foreshadowing of who she will become, such as the version of her that we see in the quote-unquote castration scene. Now, the scene in this film that I think is the biggest testament to my point about how this film toys with your emotions is, of course, the scene where Linda and Bradley have legitimately started to connect with each other and find some common ground and choose to get drunk around a campfire and share their respective backstories. We learn that Linda was married and her ex-husband died in a drunk driving accident, but that Linda was partially to blame for this. Essentially, the story goes that Linda's husband was incredibly abusive and he would very often get drunk, and she would intentionally steal his car keys and hide them, specifically so that he wouldn't be able to find them and get in his car and, you know, get into a drunk driving accident. But in this specific instance, one night, it just was her final straw, I guess, and she purposefully left the keys out in a place where he would see them the first thing when he walked in the door, and basically set things in motion so that he would die in a drunk driving accident. This information about Linda doesn't just confirm our suspicions about her capacity for violence, but it also explains why she genuinely is not willing to take any shit from Bradley throughout the entire movie. It completely explains and adds context to why she treats him the way she does. Despite the obvious social and economic differences between Bradley and Linda's dead ex-husband, Linda sees a lot of that ex-husband in Bradley, aside from the inherent fuckery he already comes with by being a Nepo Baby CEO. What we learn about Bradley in this scene is that his father was basically entirely absent throughout pretty much all of his childhood, and so he was left to be raised by his mother, who was incredibly abusive. And what I love about this is that the film never confirms whether or not Bradley is telling the truth here. On one side of the coin, he absolutely could just be making this story up as a means to get Linda to empathize with him more and trust him more, because it gives them some sort of shared trauma to bond over. On the flip side of this though, he could be telling the truth and it could just be an explanation as to why he is the way he is. I think we can assume that Linda's is true, given the fact that her arc in the film is essentially learning to accept that she is kind of a psychopath, and hey, that's okay sometimes, even if a lot of her feelings and actions are justified. I mean, she literally sabotages every single means of escape that presents itself throughout the film and never tells Bradley about them, because she realizes that on this island, she is finally valued as a person. Her value as a person is finally acknowledged and seen. And of course, by the end of the movie, she manages to use her experience on this island to build a career for herself on the mainland, and she becomes a celebrity as a result, and everybody loves her. Her murdering Bradley and his fiance, never to be known to the public. Linda allowing Zuri to fall to her death. Zuri is Bradley's fiance. Linda allowing her to fall to her death is not only consistent with what we know about Linda's past and this sort of pattern of behavior, but it further serves the idea that although we empathize with her, her actions in certain moments are legitimately morally indefensible. Sure, we despise Bradley, but why should that same hatred be projected onto Zuri? If anything, Zuri chartering an old rickety fishing boat that's really hanging on its last leg to sail the ocean and find her missing fiance is a testament to her resilience and her loyalty and her bravery, which are all qualities that are typically pretty cool to find in a person. For all accounts and purposes, from what we see in the film, Zuri is a perfectly fine person. And that's why when Bradley finds her dead body on the beach and breaks down, we do legitimately feel kinda bad. I'd also like to mention that this movie is very, very good at setup and payoff. The most obvious, of course, being setting up that Linda is a fan of Survivor and auditioned to be on the show, and then when she gets on the island, she is legitimately a very talented and skilled and capable survivalist. But the rock from which Zuri falls, which is also the rock that Linda lures her onto so that she can fall, is also set up much earlier in the movie when Linda and Bradley are exploring and Linda almost falls to her death from the same loose rock. In the moment, we see it as just a short little moment of tension because this is a thriller and you have to have those little bursts of tension, and we assume that it's not something that would come back. It doesn't really clock to us in our minds that this is something that's going to be important later on. But later on, when Linda and Zuri are walking that same path and you see that rock, you know exactly in that moment what Linda is planning to do. There's also the moment where Linda warns Bradley not to go to a certain part of the island, saying that it's dangerous and filled with dangerous animals and thorns and poison herbage and everything. And we are inclined to believe her, since this happens during the stretch of the film where the movie is still depicting her to be an incredibly smart and capable survivalist, so why wouldn't we believe her? But of course, later on, it's revealed that the real reason Linda didn't want Bradley to go to that side of the island is because this island is actually owned by a Wall Street billionaire, and that side of the island is where his massive fucking mansion is, which Linda has known about for a very, very long time, unbeknownst to us. And that is the twist that I said I legitimately did not see coming and could not have seen coming. And of course, at the end of the film, a full slasher-style pursuit between Bradley and Linda ensues, where Bradley partially scalps Linda and sticks a finger in her eye. If you're sensitive to eye stuff in movies like this, just be warned. Eventually, Linda leads him to this mansion where she gains the upper hand by using the home's built-in security system, and Bradley delivers what almost feels like a genuine apology here, like complete with tears and everything. And again, Dylan O'Brien is such a fucking good actor that for a minute there, I legitimately thought that Bradley was being serious, despite the fact that this is so clearly a situation where anybody would say or do anything in order to survive, especially somebody as selfish and self-righteous as Bradley. But Linda almost falls for it. That's how convincing it is. But of course, it's all just a ploy to get Linda to let her guard down so Bradley can attack her, but it doesn't take long before Linda takes that power back for herself and kills Bradley with one swift swing of a golf club right into his temple. Joel was a much better man than Bradley. This also results in one of the best transitions I've seen in a long time. It is such a good transition that it almost made up for my disappointment in not actually being able to see Bradley die a brutal, horrible, graphic, gory, bloody death. But I digress. It's a great finale, incredibly satisfying either way. Send Help is one of the most entertaining, riveting, hilarious, and satisfying thrillers I have seen in many, many years, and it's elevated to the gold standard of over-the-top filmmaking with Sam Raimi behind the camera. And once again, I am very, very impressed that the writers of Freddy vs. Jason and fucking Baywatch were able to write something like this. Where the fuck was this skill and this level of talent before? I imagine they're going to be getting a lot of calls now that this movie is out, because it is legitimately kind of a perfect screenplay for what this movie is trying to be. I can confidently say that I'm genuinely excited to see what they do next. I'm going to be keeping my eye on them now. Guys, if you haven't seen Send Help yet, why the fuck are you here? I literally just spoiled the whole goddamn movie. But either way, if you haven't seen it yet, please do try and see it in theaters, if it's still showing in a theater near you, of course. Support it as much as you can at the very least, so that Hollywood can potentially get the message that we like and we want: original rated R thrillers from visionary filmmakers. I truly cannot wait to add this one to my Blu-ray collection. I already want to watch it again, like right now. That's how much I fucking enjoyed it. Look forward to my video on Iron Lung, which I did see, and spoiler alert, it's pretty fucking good. Thank you guys so much as always for watching. I will see you in the next video, and until then, keep writing, keep shooting, and keep editing.